Professor Worgley's here. We just got done updating the initialize method. We set the audio spectrum listener and we played the different visualizers that are given to you as examples. So the program's working, but you'll want to have a better understanding of the methods that are being used here. You'll see when the media player is ready, the handle ready method will get called. So handle ready will get the total duration of the current media file and set that on the user display. So I'm going to do the set text with the duration as a string. You'll see I'll also get the current time, which should be 0 once the media file is first loaded. I'm going to set the text as well. And then you'll see I'm going to call the current visualizer start method. So once the audio file has been loaded in the open media, so you'll see here I say new media and new media player, and I set the media player. So now it should be ready. So after I set the media player with the media file, I'm going to call handle ready. So that's going to call your visualizer. Now your visualizer should get ready to play. So I'm going to call the start method, which should now put all the objects on the display. So you'll see when I first run the program, the user interface will appear and all of the ellipses will be drawn as their default sizes. So if I click on a media file, so if I open up, let's say an MP3, you'll see handle ready was called, and that's why all these ellipses are drawn, because the start method was called here with the current number of bands. So I should update this viz pane with the current number of bands. You'll see I also set the slider to 0, and the slider's max is equal to the duration of the song. So it goes from 0 to the duration. Now you'll see handle end of media is called when the listener on the media player activates this method. So set on end of media. So when the media reaches the end, this event listener will get called and this method will be called as well. So the event listener will be triggered and this method will be called. So at the end of the media, I'll say media player stop. So make sure the media player stops. I've also seen students have it repeat depending on what you want to do. And then I'm going to say media player seek duration back to 0. Okay, so I'm going to set the media player seek to 0. Let's see what the seek method does. So if you ever see a method, you're not sure what it's doing, go ahead and right click the method and do a show Java doc. So if it's a pre-built-in method, there is an associated Java doc with it that you can see what the method's doing. So if I do a control F for find, look for seek, you'll see seek will seek the player to the new playback time. So it's essentially going to set the media player at that specified duration. Okay, and here's a better understanding. So you'll see seeks the player to the new playback time. Invoking this method will have no effect while the player status is stop or while the media player duration is infinite. The behavior of seek is constrained as follows, where start time and stop time indicate the effective lower and upper bounds respectively of the media playback time. So it gives you a nice table here so you can understand the limits. So I'm going to set the seek to 0 and I'm going to set the slider back to 0. So once it reaches the end of the song, I'm going to move everything back to the beginning. Handle update was called when the audio spectrum listener is activated. So as it's listening at this interval with this number of bands, it's going to call handle update, which will do what we said earlier. And then I have all my JavaFX event listeners for the UI. So when they click handle open, that is going to be the file open menu option here. So when they click open, you'll see I grab the stage, I display a file chooser, I let them select a file, and as long as the file is not null, I call the open media method, which we went over earlier, okay, which is up here. It has a file passes as a parameter, it sets up the media player and sets the spectrum listener. Handle play is the play button. So if the media player is not null, I'm going to say go ahead and play the media player. I have a pause button on there, which pauses the media player. I also have a stop button, which will stop the media player. And if they press the slider, as long as the media player is not null, I'll go ahead and pause the audio file so we can see this happen. So if I open up, let's say an MP3, play it, you'll see when I click the slider, which will activate this method here. So if I click the slider, you'll see it does pause the media player. If I release, it plays again. So if I click, it'll pause. If I release, it's going to play. And you'll see that method's happened here. So once the slider is released, as long as the media player is not null, I'm going to set the seek of the media player to whatever the slider's value is. So remember, the slider was already set up to be 0 to the max time, which was the duration of the song. So the slider's beginning value will be 0, and the max value will be the duration of the song. So the program will figure out what happens in between. So the beginning of the slider is 0, the end of the slider is this value right here, the length. So as I'm updating the slider, it's going to update the song. And the way that the slider is generated is it'll find the length of the slider and take the maximum value and set the corresponding values for that slider. So that's a built-in functionality of the slider. So when I release the slider, I find out where the slider is and grab the value of it. I'm going to go ahead and print that to the console here. You'll see that's being printed. And then I'm going to call the current visualizer start method. So I want it to set up the UI with the current parameters, and then I'm going to go ahead and play the media player. So that's what's happening here. When I click, it pauses. When I update, I then need to remove the elements and set up the UI again. You'll see everything works smoothly. Now there's a lot of methods here, but that's all of them. Okay, so there's a lot of functionality to make this work. Make sure you go through and understand what's happening, just in case you need to update anything. You understand how the program works, and you will be able to update the controller if need be. I want to increase this value here to show you if I increase the update interval and have 140 bands, it'll be really hard for the computer to handle that, depending on what machine you have. You'll see it's very sensitive now because it's updating very frequently compared to what it was before. So you can see more of the fine-grained details. But if I increase the number of bands, okay, you'll see that's a lot more detail than we saw earlier. But if I increase the number of bands, the machine that I'm on now is able to handle that, but it depends on what machine you have. So be careful by having it too sensitive, because if it starts to freeze and the TAs aren't able to run your visualizer, then there's going to be a problem when we're grading the visualizer. So try to make it for a standard machine. And I can hear my fan start to kick on as I have it updating so frequently, which is not a problem for the fan to kick on, but you'll want to make sure the machine is able to handle all the updates that we're trying to give it. Now, I've seen some students, they had to remove 140. I saw some students need to increase the update interval. Depending on what your visualizer is doing, go ahead and modify it to make sure that it works good for your visualizer. So let's say for your visualizer, 140 is too much for the machine and your visualizer starts to freeze. We'll go ahead and remove 140. That way the TAs don't experience that lag and then take points off for your visualizer. Or let's say 0.01 is too fast and it's updating too much. Change it back to 0.05 to make sure your visualizer runs smooth. If you have a really advanced machine and you want to show how well your visualizer does under your environment, some students were making a small video they posted up to YouTube so they could show their visualizer, just in case the TAs had trouble running their visualizer on their machine. So depending on what you do, you may want to record your visualizer so we can see it under the given environment that you have. Now, there's still a lot left. I want to add a visualizer, so essentially I'm going to go through the challenge just like you would need to go through the challenge. So I'm going to add my own visualizer to this program. I'm going to show exactly what you need to do. That way you finish the challenge successfully. Stick with Professor Wergeles. We'll see you in the next video.